So, I want to start off by saying welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, welcome. If you're a fanatic of everything entertainment, that's the channel for you. But in today's movie review, we'll be talking about 2007's 28 Weeks Later. So let's get into it. Now, I've stated before that this movie is a first-time watch for me, and that's because I never really had any interest in seeing it because none of the original cast members showed up. Not many people from the original film's production showed up, so I never really had any interest in seeing it, and then I heard like really good word of mouth about it, especially like leading up to years later. So I'm like, I need to give it a chance. Finally did, and yeah, here's my thoughts on 28 Weeks Later. So let's get into the things I did like about this movie. Just know I will be talking about spoilers because this movie is 18 years old, and I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people watching this movie leading up to years later. So be wary of that. But one of my favorite things about this movie is the story. They do change some things up, especially when it has to do with immunity, which other properties have done that before, like The Last of Us and such. But like this adds like a hereditary aspect to it, which I've never seen before in a zombie slash infected film. I don't believe, or any film of that matter. But I'm just saying, I love that about this movie because we think that the mom to these two children died at the beginning of this film because of the cowardice husband, and turns out she's immune because she got bit. We didn't know that until like 20 minutes, 30 minutes into the movie. And then once you find that out, you're like, oh, the poster actually makes a lot of sense now. Another thing I love about this movie is the opening sequence, like I stated before. The opening sequence, really intense. And I've stated this before, but like I think Danny Boyle like hired like I'm gonna say like 8 to 10 athletes to play the infected in the first film, especially with that tunnel scene, to make it look like a lot more infected than there really was. This opening scene really intense, and there's at least like 40 or 50 people chasing after the one of the leads. Very intense, and like he barely escapes. And I was a fan of that scene, regardless of him being a coward or not. That whole scene, the opening scene, it's pretty damn good. Now, I will say, I do love the main characters in here. Not the dad, but his two children, and then Jeremy Renner and Rose Byrne. I forgot their characters' names. I just remember the actors' names more than I do the characters, but like the two children, and then Jeremy Renner and Rose Byrne. I don't know. I really loved them in this movie. And then when those three or four are on screen together, that's when I feel like this film really does pick up. Which I'm not saying this movie was bad, before that. I'm just saying that like everything just builds up and adds up when all three of them or all four of them are on screen together. I also love that this movie has like a consistent amount of emotion. Like the first film, there's like two or three scenes that are very emotional to me. This film, I guess, because like our two main characters are children, or at least a tween and a teen, like there's just a lot more at stake here, and their relationship uh, is great, and I think it's a lot better than that of the original film because the main thing I was mixed on with the first film was Hannah, played by Megan Burns, and like I wasn't a big fan of her performance, but her relationship with her dad was great. But I'm glad to say that like both actors in this relationship were great. So you really latch onto it, and that's why it's a bit emotional, especially when it has to do with family too. And the sniper scene in here is great. Like it's very intense, and it's like the start of Jeremy Renner's character arc because he just seems like another douchebag soldier, but then he turns into like the hero of the story. And I was a really big fan of that arc because I don't know if I did see it coming or not, especially when I thought he was a bit of an asshole, like when talking to his buddies. But then again, you bust each other's balls when you're best friends. But it's just the fact that like I didn't expect that out of his character, so I was a big fan of it. And then when he sacrifices himself, that was a really emotional scene because he saved himself in order to push a car that wouldn't start, and then he gets burned alive by a flamethrower, and that was some shit. The production value in here is also a lot higher than that of the original film because the setting in here, regardless if it's the setting in here or the streets of London, because I feel like they utilize it a lot more in this film. I feel like they actually were able to shut down streets in order to film for this, where they didn't really get to do that in the original film. And then, like, the cameras used in here. Uh, Even though I watched this on DVD, I could tell it looked a lot better than Days Later, but that's because they shot Days Later digitally on like a 720p camera. So like I'm glad to say that this movie looks better. And I think that's why it feels like it's a more grand scale. I don't know. There's just a lot going on at play here, and the practical effects in here. I feel like that we get to see that a bit more in this film. There's a bit more gore in here as well, and I'm glad that it shows mostly everything. Whereas Days Later, they They hide it well with the budget. You didn't get to see everything. This one, you get to see mostly everything, and I was a fan of it. And the acting across the board, like I've stated before, the two children in here, Jeremy Renner, Rose Byrne, even the cowardice dad and the mom, Idris Elba, everyone else are great in here, and that's why, like, even with the characters I hated, I'm glad I did because the actors portrayed it perfectly. I don't know if the infected in here are evolving, but after the dad turns, like he stalks his children, and I didn't see that coming. Like his son sees him at times even after he turns, and I'm like, where are they going with this? And then there's like this night camera sequence at the end that was really intense. Aside aside from some of the weird editing choices, it was a really intense sequence. And then it turns out he bites his son, and thankfully his son's immune too because it was a hereditary thing from his mom. And then his daughter kills him, but it was just the fact that like, so he knows there's something inside him that knows, and I'm like, are they evolving or what? So like, I'm questioning that, and I don't know if they're gonna expand upon that in years later, but we'll have to see. There have been times where people said like because of the camera quality, and days later that it feels like they shot part of it on CCTV footage. There's actual CCTV footage in here, and I thought that was pretty funny. And I don't know if like they got that complaint or they wanted to like expand upon that or show that. I thought that was pretty funny. But with that being said, let's move on to the things that I'm mixed on with this movie. The CGI in here, I'm like 50-50 on it because some of it looks decent, all things considered. But there's like certain buildings you see in the background, or like there's just explosions or certain vehicles shown that you're like, come on, man, you couldn't get like a real car or like blow up like a miniature or something. Like there have been times where like you could tell, but like at other times it actually looks decent. Maybe that's because it was on DVD and it blurs it a bit better and hides it a bit better. But I watched it on a 70-inch TV, so I was like, there are certain things I noticed, so that's why I'm putting it in mixed. And the other thing I'm mixed on with this movie is the ending. Now, I'm all for a dark ending. Like one of my favorite movies of all time is The Mist, but I was expecting this movie to end like on a satisfying note, but before it cuts to 28 days later, it shows Jeremy Renner's friend like rescuing the two children in here, and they ride off in the helicopter, and I'm like, okay, that was pretty satisfying. And then it cuts to 28 days later, and it shows like the inside wreckage of the helicopter, and they're in Paris, and there's like infected, and maybe if I saw this when it came out, it might not would have bothered me because I was like, oh, they're gonna make another one in a few years. It's been 18 years since this movie came out, so like, there's things that I'm questioning about here about this movie, and I'm like, are they gonna answer that in years later? Because I don't know if weeks later is canon or not, but I know that Danny Boyle like mentioned Paris or something about Paris in one of the interviews for years later, so I don't know if we're gonna get any answers from that or not, but like it's something that like I'm not saying I wanted it to end a certain way, but like knowing that it's been 18 years, and I'm like, okay, so what happened to the characters? I don't know. But if they cut to it beforehand, like before the 28 days later, I would have been satisfied with this movie and maybe went a few points higher for my rating. But like, I feel like I needed a bit more, maybe another 5-10 minutes to explain things. I don't know. But with that being said, let's move on to the things that I didn't like about this movie. And I know that I brought up certain sequences like the sniper scene and the nighttime camera scene, but at times I feel like those scenes were about to be ruined because of choppy editing once again. And that was like one of the main complaints I had with the first film because it's like so choppy and everything. And I'm like, great, they borrowed that from the first movie too. So like, I don't know. I wish that like it was more not stable, but like more easier to follow. I don't know. So another thing that I'm negative on is, our two main leads in here, the children, they come back to England after being gone for so long, for about 6 months or whatever, or 28 weeks. And, once they settle in, the next thing they do after they wake up the next morning is like go back to their house. And I'm like, even though it's like shut off, I mean, it makes sense as to why they would want to do that, but it was a pretty stupid decision, as considering that like There could be infected there, you know? And but instead they find their mom and I was like confused at first. I'm like, oh wait, that's the mom. So like it does lead into a satisfying like next scene or two when it explains things and you get to see what's wrong with her. Um, but like I thought that was a pretty stupid decision, even though I would have done the same thing if I was their age. So I'm not gonna be too harsh on it. And the last thing I'm negative on is they copy my favorite kill in the first movie, and that's the eyeball gouge scene. But this time it's from an infected, and I'm like, but then again, like I've stated earlier, I think they're evolving, and there's like a little bit of human left, or at least in the cowardice dad, because like he automatically goes after his wife, and one of the first things he does is just like gouge her eyes out, and I'm like, that's one of the best kills in the first movie, and you're gonna copy it? Like it just doesn't make sense to me. I wish they didn't do that. Maybe do something else, but I hate that he kills her anyway. But it's just the fact that like you're copying like the best death in the first movie. Come up with something different, please. But either way, with that being said, I'm going to be giving 2007's 28 Weeks Later an overall grade of a 79%. I will say I liked this a lot more than I thought I would, and I'm glad to say that too, because if Years Later is like almost as good as this movie or almost as good as the first movie, we have a pretty solid horror trilogy on our hands, you know? So either way, this movie does make me more excited for Years Later. I'm hoping that they answer a couple things from this movie, but I highly doubt it because it's not the same creators as the second film, and the second film is not the same creators as the first. So, like, I don't know. But either way, I just want to say thank you as always for watching my videos and hope to see you in the next one.